Ever had a conversation with your friends and said, this should be a podcast? Well, this is that. Welcome to Bonnerfide Conversations. What is going on, good people? And welcome to another edition of Bonnerfide Conversations here on the Bonnerfide Podcast Network. I hope you are doing well. I hope your day is absolutely fantastic. I just hope that life is treating you kind. And I just want to honor each and every one of you who have decided to take some time and join us here on the podcast. Now, I recognize that people have joined us from different spaces, different times, different seasons of their life, and different seasons of this podcast. But I'm grateful that you are hanging out with us. Would you do me a favor and leave a comment wherever you're listening to this or even watching this? Yes, we are officially on YouTube. You can subscribe to the Bonnerfide Media channel on YouTube to check out all of our podcasts, including here at Bonnerfide Conversations. And if you're a wrestling fan, the Faction Reloaded is there as well, along with some other cool things that are on the way and some archived podcasts as well. So definitely feel free to check them all out as part of the Bonnerfide Podcast Network on YouTube. And certainly wherever you are streaming this or listening to this, we honor and appreciate that you are hanging with us. Do me a favor, leave us a comment and rate us as well wherever you're joining us. It allows people like you to hear and experience content like this. And I get the sense that this kind of content is the kind of content that if you need to binge listen to, you can do that. It's the kind of content that isn't necessarily moved and motivated by current events, though that does play into it. This is much more of a space that's going to allow you to really become all that it is that you are supposed to become. So I really hope that you find solace in that. You know what I've learned? I've learned that oftentimes people are going through life and they don't know who to have conversations with, and they don't know who can come alongside them to assist them in whatever it is they're dealing with. So sometimes you decide to talk to the wrong person, and when you do, you realize that, wait a minute, my information isn't private, or my information and my experience is not being regarded and presented in the way that is germane and sacred to me. So it then puts you in a space where you don't want to talk to anybody anymore. You just want to handle it all yourself. And I just want to tell you, you were never created to do life alone. You were never created to try to figure it all out on your own. You were designed to be a part of community. You were designed to have somebody or some bodies come alongside you and do life with you. That's really why you've been trying to figure out, hey, who's going to be my friend? Who can I converse with? Who in the world is it that is best friend material? Who is sibling material? You know, the siblings that we choose, not always the ones that share our blood. Who is going to be the proper spouse? Who's the person that can hold a familial role? Father, mother, auntie, that type of thing. And, you know, we are very much in an era where you can choose who sits in those particular seats outside of those who by birth and by blood have those seats. So in trying to choose all of them, sometimes you don't want your business out there. My hope is that this podcast serves as a bit of a silent P. What do I mean by the silent P? You know, the P is there. The people don't see it. You don't pronounce it, but its influence is still there. My hope is that what we share on a weekly basis is the kind of content and material that serves as a bit of a guide and an accompaniment to what it is you're dealing with in life. And hopefully you have learned or are learning through my experiences that we have shared experiences, and that it will put you in a space or a place to get the kind of advice and wisdom that you need to attack whatever it is that you're facing. That's my hope. That's my prayer. And I hope that it's accomplishing that. If it is, would you let me know? Because I would love to know. One of the real challenges that can happen is, and I've learned this from my many years in radio, is you are sitting in a room where you are unable to see or hear or feel the immediate response from what you're sharing. And sometimes you can feel like, hey, nobody's paying attention. It's that whole, if a tree falls in a forest and there's nobody there to hear it, is there sound? Well, of course there's sound, but if there's nobody there to authenticate it, prove it, then who knows? Well, my thought is this: you are my sound, family. So I'd love to hear from you, to know how this is impacting you, what this is doing for you, and the like. So you can hit me up on the socials at Bonnerfide, and definitely let me know on all of the spaces. You can feel free to comment on any of the videos and clips that we share as well, because I definitely think it will be helpful to you. So this has been another very interesting week in my world. I don't know how you guys have felt. I know early in last week, I was just like, what is going on? There's just a lot that was happening. Days at work were super filled. Days outside of work were super filled. Like, what is going on? And then I had an interesting moment this week that really, I think, tested my internal will, the human spirit, et cetera, et cetera. And I learned an awful lot from that moment. I might talk about it to some degree, but I'll tell you the overarching lesson that I learned from this week, and that is the power of a decision. And so I want to spend some time talking to you about decisions. If we're honest with ourselves, some of us have had a really hard time making decisions. Now, there are other people who can make a decision at the drop of a dime. And I honestly admire those people who have enough internal fortitude and can trust their decision making enough to decide, like, yo, I want to do X, Y, Z, and then put things in place to ensure that X, Y, Z happens. But the bulk of us, and I include me in this, don't often commit to a decision that comes across our mind. You're placed with options and choices, and you're trying to figure out, what do I do? Do I go left? Do I go right? Now, some of these decisions, if we're honest, don't have nearly as much impact initially. But then there are other decisions that are riddled with tremendous and significant impact, both today and long term. And for many of us, there's always the question of, how do I know that I'm making the right decision? I want to do a little bit of excavation today, because I want to help you do a better job of making good decisions. Now, this might not sound super sexy to some people, but if you rock with me for a minute, I think we're going to begin to uncover what has made decision making difficult for you and how it can become easier. Now, I believe these kinds of ideas and concepts are going to help you all across the board, whatever genre of decision you're trying to make. Now, I get it, right? Certain decisions, again, aren't as weighty. For instance, we think about, what am I going to eat this morning? Am I going to have bacon and eggs? Am I going to have cereal? Am I going to have a sweet treat? Is it going to be a donut, a pastry, something that involves coffee, perhaps, right? Most of us don't really have a hard time trying to figure that out. But the thing that happens in moments like that is you realize that over time, those decisions compounded can create a varying situation. What I mean by a variant situation is what you eat in the morning can help determine how much energy you have during a given day, and how often you consume a particular item can help determine what your overall health looks like. We often don't think about the impact of eating breakfast, lunch, or dinner throughout the day until we get a bit older and we start to see certain things pop up, in our bodies. And we're like, well, where did that come from? I remember very randomly, a few years ago, I had a health scare. I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly, but I had a health scare. And the health scare was, I remembered a few moments where I was just in this unbelievable amount of pain. And I didn't understand where it was coming from. I've worked very hard throughout my life to try to be physically fit. I walk quite a bit. I had been exercising, all of the things, and I didn't understand where this pain on the right side of my stomach came from. Didn't make a lot of sense to me. And so I thought I ate fairly healthy. Of course, every now and again, I got my things that I like. I love fries. I love hot food. I love, as in spicy food. Like I love all of that stuff, that type of thing. I love my fried chicken. I love soul food. I love all of those things. But I also like to balance it with, cauliflower and vegetables and those kinds of things. So I didn't understand where this pain was coming from. I thought that the pain I was experiencing was connected to not eating enough or not eating at proper intervals. So I would eat, and at times those pains came along, when I was hungry. So I would eat and it would seemingly go away. But there was this stretch of time. I remembered first feeling this significant pain. I had taken my first trip to Jamaica for pro wrestling. Shout out to All Caribbean Wrestling. And so I remember kind of experiencing the pain a little bit then, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. Couple weeks later, I end up in this space where literally for about 4 days, I was in this unbelievable amount of pain. And I remember staying up all night trying to figure out, why am I in pain? I literally went to the convenience store about 2 a.m. since Walmart and no other place was open to find some Pepto-Bismol. And, I'm trying to find all of these things that could alleviate the pain. And nothing did. So if you know me, I don't like to go to the doctor, and I absolutely don't like to go to the hospital. Now, don't come for me on this. This is just a me thing, right? But I discovered that I had to go to the hospital because I thought I was going to die. The pain was some kind of extreme. So when I went to the doctor, actually the emergency room, they brought me in, and I thought there was going to be some easy fix for this. And they started running tests and all kinds of things and discovered that my gallbladder needed to be removed immediately. Like, this was not something that could wait for weeks on end. And I'm going, wait a minute, like I'm self-employed. My insurance isn't really the kind where I would want some sort of surgery to happen. And so now I'm very concerned because I'm going to miss time at work. I'm going to have to deal with actually being in the hospital overnight. Like, I'm not prepared for all of this. Went through the surgery. The surgery ended up being good. They had to remove my gallbladder. But now I'm sitting here wondering, how did we get here? Like, what? I thought I was making the kinds of decisions that would not cause a gallbladder issue to be a thing. So I remember as I'm preparing for this surgery, I'm calling people, trying to let them know, hey, here's what's going on. And I remember calling my dad. When I called my dad, he didn't sound shocked at all. And I'm expecting him to be like, oh my God, you have to go to the hospital. Like, are you going to be okay? Et cetera, et cetera. And Dad was like, well, I'm not surprised by that at all. I mean, remember, your mom had gallbladder issues. Your brother had his gallbladder removed a couple of years ago, and your other brother just had gallbladder surgery. And now I'm like, wait a minute. First of all, how do I not know this? I knew about my mom because I remembered seeing the pain my mom was in. And my mom, shout out to her. I love her so much and miss her dearly. But my mom was trying to display to us what was inside. So she kept the gallstones that were removed and had them on a jar on the entertainment center in the living room. I know that's a bit graphic, but she did. And it was like, wow. But it didn't dawn on me that that could potentially be hereditary. And I learned through that experience that it was hereditary. Now, why am I mentioning that? Because you need to understand the origin of some of your decisions. Some of your decisions come as a result of, hey, this is my preference and I'm trying to do X, Y, Z. And some of your decisions are a result of what's happened historically in your family. Now, this is where we're going to dig, because where most of us don't understand why we have a hard time making decisions, you just need to sometimes look at what happened when I was growing up. What happened in my family that caused me to have a difficult time making decisions? And so over the last 1.5 to 2 years, I've done some personal excavation, and I've learned some of the challenges that have happened in us making decisions. So for instance, in making decisions, one of the things that became really, really challenging was often having to look at other people to decide, hey, is this cool that I make said decision? This idea that I have to get, there's a wonderful scripture that says, you paraphrase, give me just an opportunity to do that. Paraphrasing, it says there is wisdom found in a multitude of counsel. So it gives this idea that, hey, talking to multiple people will help you in your ability to make good decisions. And I certainly respect that. I absolutely, positively respect the opportunity to have a lot of people involved in that. Here's where that becomes challenging, though, because we often involve or feel the need to involve multiple people in our decision making when we are in a space where we don't trust our own ability to make a decision. So the question is, where did that come from? For me, it was the realization that the people around me didn't feel comfortable making decisions. They often found themselves asking a bunch of people and then waiting for someone's approval before they said, yes, I can go with this decision. Yes, this decision will work for me. Now, here's where that becomes challenging. Some decisions are time-based, right? You can't spend your time waiting for a long time trying to make a decision. Other decisions are connected to, all right, this choice is going to be a lengthy choice. So for instance, or it's going to have long-term effects. I remember when I was trying to decide where to go to college, I personally wanted to go to, first of all, out of state. I lived in New York. I lived specifically in Monticello, New York. Shout out to everybody from Monticello. But if you grew up in Monticello, you knew that the goal was to get out of Monticello. There was nothing there, particularly for creatives, people who saw their lives being bigger than that. There was nothing there. So for me, college was my way out. But how am I going to get there? And where am I going to go? And herein lies a very interesting conflict that happened for me. My parents wanted me to go to a school in state, specifically like SUNY Binghamton or one of those other colleges, and no knock to them. But in my mind, I'd seen people who had gone to SUNY Binghamton and Oneonta and those other schools, and it didn't really amount to anything. They didn't have the career trajectory that I said I want to follow. And it was only 2 hours from home. It didn't give me the kind of independence that I wanted to really be able to walk into adulthood. So what would I do? And here was an interesting conflict in terms of decisions. My parents wanted me to go to SUNY Binghamton. I wanted to go out of state, and I wanted to go to Virginia because my cousins had just moved there and I admired them so much that I was like, I want to be in a space where they are. So I only applied to schools in Virginia because for me, that's where I wanted to go. UVA, Virginia Tech, and ultimately Virginia Union. I applied to those, and it was in direct conflict to what my parents wanted. In fact, fun fact, my parents had not saved up money for me to go to college. There was the expectation that I was going to have a scholarship. So then the idea of me as a an out-of-state student going to Virginia just wasn't in the cards, to the point where I ended up having to pay for my own application fees to these schools, because they were like, no, our suggestion is SUNY Binghamton. You'll go there, SUNY or Oneonta or somewhere in the state, or you just won't go. So now I'm faced with a very important decision and having to ask myself, okay, well, what do I do? Now, you guys know I'm a person of faith. And while I don't try to impose that level of faith on other people, I have to talk about how it has grown me. And so in that moment, again, I didn't have a lot of people who could walk that out and say, hey, here's what I did. You do this. So I'm applying for these schools. I ended up applying for the schools in Binghamton, but I didn't want to go there. So for me, what helped me with making a strong decision was, one, praying. And I asked God, I was like, hey, listen, I really want to go out of state. Like I do. I don't want to stay here. I have a bigger future than that. And I remember praying that multiple times. And I remember specifically it was about 2 weeks before graduation. And I had to actually work on a Sunday. I rarely ever had to work on a Sunday. And I was the organist at our church. And I was just like, okay, well, I remember walking to work and I remember saying to God, hey, listen, all right, if you don't want me to go to school out of state, I submit, I tab, that's fine. I'm good. And I was legitimately good with that decision. That was on a Sunday. The next day, I get an acceptance letter from Virginia Union. And Virginia Union tells me, hey, you have a presidential scholarship. Now, I didn't apply for this scholarship, and I didn't know what it was. So I'm calling them and I'm saying, hey, I just got this acceptance letter. Where do I go? What is this thing about the presidential scholarship? And that's when I learned from them. They said, oh, a presidential scholarship. That is a full academic scholarship that covers room and board. It covers tuition and everything. The only thing it doesn't cover are your books. And in that moment is where I learned, hey, wait, I can begin trusting my own decision-making process because of who I'm consulting. So for me, it was let me consult God and be resolved about whatever decision needs to be made. Because for me, it began the moment of trusting what direction God would take me. And from then until now, I have learned that trusting the decision-making process for me, it has to go through God. It has to be me saying, okay, Lord, here's where I am. I'm at a fork in the road and I don't know what to do. And trusting his ability to say, do this, don't do that. And sometimes it's a voice. Sometimes it's circumstances pointing in a specific direction. Sometimes it's conversations with other people, but it's being open and connected enough to God to go, all right, here's what I hear you directing me to do, so I'm going to do it. And that has been the path for me throughout my entire life. Now that gets tricky. Here's why it gets tricky for me, because I've often questioned whether or not I'm actually hearing God, or is it just me and my preferences? And I don't know if that's a struggle for some other people, but when that is a struggle, then it makes decision-making difficult, because it's like, how do I know what I'm hearing? How do I know what these circumstances are pointing me towards? How do I know that this information that's coming to me is accurate information or not? How do I know? And the reality of it is, this is where you have to begin to study how God operates, what he says, what he does, what makes sense, what is consistent with his character. Now, here's the thing about that. Even in doing that, you still have to make the decision. And I think there are a lot of people who are expecting somebody to make the decision for them. And that's where a lot of us get tripped up. We want this one, that one, or the other one to make the decision for us. And here's why. Because if you make the decision for me and it doesn't go the way I intend or desire, then I now have someone to blame for said decision. That's why matchmaking is such a problem and I don't get involved in it. Because if you pair two people together and it doesn't work out, now somebody can turn around and blame you. It was your fault. You said I should go hook up with this person and look what it did to me. So I just want to tell you, you cannot afford to attempt to lay blame on the feet of someone else for a decision you made. Let's go a little deeper and say this. If you are waiting for someone else to make the decision for you, you will live in a space where nothing will ever happen. Truth be told, God is not going to make the decision for you. Whoever you call the universe is not going to make the decision for you. Your parents don't have the responsibility of making the decision for you. You have to decide. You can take other people's input. You can take their advice, but at the end of the day, you have to pull the trigger and say, this is my decision, and you have to own it. So let's talk about this. Sometimes a ton of evidence pointing a particular direction shows up for us. But because we don't like the conclusion that it comes to, we want something else to serve as information to inform our decision making. And here's where that becomes problematic. If you're always looking to somebody else before you feel comfortable making the decision, you won't ever make a decision. So think about this. If you're deciding, and I'm having this conversation because I'm realizing the power of a decision, and I'm realizing that there are many of you who are watching or who are listening who have a hard time landing on a decision. The evidence that 2 + 2 = 4 can be right before you, but because you don't like the idea that, oh my God, 2 + 2 = 4, what happens if I actually pull the trigger and make that decision? Because you don't like what the implications of that could be, you are willing to stay in an unfavorable situation because you made the decision and because there's nobody else to blame. Listen, I've had to look back over my life, especially in the last 2 years, and recognize, Gerard, you are responsible for that decision. Yes, I can look at my childhood and say that influenced that decision. I could look at how I was raised. I could look at a number of circumstances. But at the end of the day, I have to land at the fact that Gerard made that decision, good, bad, or indifferent. And I need you to understand that first things first, you've got to be willing to own your decisions. Hey, I chose to take that job. I chose to enter into that relationship. I chose to move to that city. It was me. It was me. It was you, right? You've got to be able to own that and say, I made the choice and that I'm willing to connect to whatever that choice produces. I'm willing to own it. And some people aren't willing to do that. So we'll blame everybody else. We'll blame everything else. We'll blame, it's my childhood that caused me to do that. And I think the problem with laying blame on everybody else for the decisions that we've ultimately made is that we don't want to take ownership, and then you don't empower yourself to make changes connected to those decisions. So let's have a conversation. Well, we're having a conversation, but I want to talk about this. Why is it that you can realize that you're going the wrong way when you punch a destination into GPS, and you're willing to take the advice of GPS to go a detour, to go another route? But when life is showing you that, hey, the decision that I made wasn't the best one, why do we have such a hard time making a change and pivoting? I'll tell you why. Because most of us have commitment issues. Yeah, that's where it gets tricky in this conversation. Most of us have commitment issues. What do I mean by that? For some of us, it's taken us so long to commit to a decision that we're willing to stick with that decision all the way to the grave. Here's why that's problematic. Because you've got to recognize your own humanity, that with the amount of information that you have, it's possible and probable that the decision you made was simply with the best information that you had, but may not have been the best decision. Yeah, okay, I probably shouldn't have had that second slice of cake. Yeah. I know I probably should have decided to go to a different school that actually reflected the major that I had. Or maybe, wow, I should have chosen a major that reflected what I actually like and not what other people thought I should be doing. I should have chosen a career that reflects my passion and not just my need for money. I should have chosen a spouse or a partner who was better connected to who I would be as opposed to who they thought I would be, right? All of these decisions, and there are plenty of others that we sit and deal with, and because it took us so long to commit to those decisions, we now don't want to amend those decisions when you realize that choice wasn't the best choice. So now the question becomes, what do I do when I made a less than favorable choice? I wish somebody told me as a child what I'm about to tell you right now. So hopefully what I'm going to tell you will free you. And that is this. If you made a choice that was not favorable, the solution to that is to make another choice. I know you thought I was going to have a 10-step program. No, make another choice. Now in that, make a better and more informed choice than the choice you made previously. Now, as I'm telling you to make a better choice, I want to remind you that sometimes with certain choices require time. I want you to consider if you are baking a cake. If you've ever baked a cake, you know that the ingredients that make up the cake don't ultimately look like what the cake is going to be. I could scream right there. Because in order for you to get that finished product, you have to put together ingredients that don't look like what the finished product will be. And then you have to mix it and batter it, which is a whole nother conversation. One day I'll spend time talking about the ingredients of the cake. But you have to put that cake together and then you have to put it in the oven so that the cake will ultimately become what it's supposed to be. I mention that because if you take the cake out early, you won't see the cake. If you take any of the ingredients out, you won't have that. So there are certain decisions that do require time. If you plant a seed, it does not sprout overnight. You've got to get good with allowing yourself the proper amount of time to see whether or not the decision you made was a good decision. With that said, it doesn't take you forever to determine that. With that said, it doesn't always take 5 years to determine that. There are certain decisions that you make that you can begin seeing results of sooner than later. And when you do, you now have to decide, okay, is this a good decision? Is this a bad decision? And at the moment where your instincts, where your gut, where your conscience tells you this was not a good decision, you need to start making changes. You got to do that. Other than that, you will lock yourself into a decision and said results that will alter your life and create a life for you that you didn't intend. I know so many people. I grew up watching people choose not to get a divorce, though they were not happily married. Some people I didn't even know were married. They would come to church, their husband wouldn't be with them, and I would learn afterwards, oh no, they're actually married. But their husband doesn't go to church. They don't talk about their marriage because they're unhappy. So many people have decided to stay at jobs, to stay in cities, to stay in relationships, whether that is a platonic relationship or a romantic relationship, because they're too afraid to make a decision that better suits them. You do realize that not every friend or every person that you call brother or sister is in it for the long haul. And you may have connected for one reason, but the way you have grown now says, I'm out of sync with that person. But you allow loyalty to cause you to stay in a space that does not suit you, that does not benefit you, and is ultimately eroding who you are. So at what point are you going to decide that my life is worth seeing what it can be by making choices to, quote unquote, undo what I did? Now, there are certain choices that seem to be irrevocable. You can't unchoose having a child. Child is here, right? You can choose your perspective on the child. You can choose your perspective on that relationship. There are many other decisions, though, that you can make a second decision and alter. Can I help you? Can you stop staying in relationships and spaces that are not helping who you are? I don't mean a momentary disagreement. I don't mean a rough patch. I mean, there are relationships and connections that you refuse to leave simply because, wow, you honor the institution more than your individualism. You honor the institution more than your individualism. How many churches have you stayed at because you honored the idea of church more than you did realizing what you individually needed and how that space was not meeting that? How many marriages have you decided to stay in because you honored the institution of marriage more than what it's supposed to produce? How many jobs have you stayed at because you represented and honored the institution of employment and you wanted to be able to say, hey, I want to have 15 years at this job, but 14 and a half of them have been bad for you? You need to understand that you have agency. You have power. You have the ability to make a better decision. And I need you to embrace that. So perhaps this is the permission slip that you needed to make a better decision. You've got to honor that. Maybe that decision you made worked for a certain phase or season or period of your life that it's no longer working for. And that's okay. And so every decision that you make to undo or to redo or to make a better choice does not have to accompany some sort of cataclysmic event. I need us to learn how to make better decisions in a more efficient and profitable way. Here's what I mean. The world doesn't have to blow up for you to choose to end a relationship. The world doesn't have to blow up for you to choose to end your connection to a job, your connection to a church, your connection to a community that may not be serving you. Stop waiting for things to be so bad that there's no hope of reconciliation. Make the choice to leave when you recognize this isn't in line or in alignment with who I am or who I'm becoming. Stop holding on to things. You know why? Because if you can stop holding on to it and let it go in a peaceful and amicable way, you might actually save some semblance of the relationship. Just because they don't serve well as your boss doesn't mean that they can't serve well as a colleague. Just because they don't serve well as a spouse doesn't mean they can't serve well as a friend or a co-parent. Just because that entity doesn't serve well as your, body of faith believers doesn't mean that you can't be friends with whoever's leading that or whoever you've connected with over time. But that all is based on how you choose to leave and how you choose to make better decisions. So, simply put, I want you to understand that the best way, well, first of all, you need to understand why you make the decisions that you make. You then need to be able to be good with making a decision that is a reflection of who you currently are and who you will be, and not be so loyal to decisions that represented who you used to be. And then on top of that, if you want to undo a decision, make a better decision. Don't just make a decision to get out of something. Understand why you're getting out and understand what it is you need to go into. My hope is that this conversation will help you become a better and more efficient decision maker so that you can ultimately become who you were put on the planet to become. You can't do that by becoming more loyal to institutions than you are your individual person. You have to recognize that I was put here for a reason, and I need to figure out what that reason is and make decisions that point me in that direction. All right, guys, I got to get out of here. That's my time. I hope that this conversation has been helpful to you, that it has provided some information and insight to you. If it has, please let me know. Hit me up on the socials, leave a comment there, rate, subscribe to this podcast, share this with your friends and loved ones. I really want you to do that. And I need us to have some more conversations like this at moments where we understand we have great power in our ability to make a decision. So with that said, I love you guys, and we'll be back next time for another episode of Bonnerfide Conversations.